Okay, shall we?
Yeah. So let's go. Hang on, let me cough one more time.
Yeah. Synchronized coughing.
It's hay fever season has arrived.
Yeah. Welcome to In Bits, the podcast that deconstructs our digital lives. I'm Nicola.
And I'm Liam, and we're both lecturers in IEDT, in psychology and cyberpsychology. Mm-hmm. So, Nicola, what are you in bits about today?
Today, we're going to talk about how everybody is periodically in bits about who we are online, and I'm in bits about how they talk about it.
Okay.
It's a circle of in bits in this.
Okay, yeah, this is, I feel like this might fall into your 2-episode ideal.
No, we are not doing 2 episodes. It's going to be 1 episode, and it's not even going to be super long, I hope. No guarantee with me.
We'll see.
So you often hear people talking about how everyone is different online. Whether that is presenting like a picture perfect view of their life, they're so perfect, no one's real online, or the opposite, like we heard about in our trolling episode, which is about how everybody is so appalling and terrible and awful online. But I don't think either of those is really the full picture of it. So today I want to talk about who we are online, as in how do we present ourselves? So what part of ourselves do we put forward online? And does that reflect who we are offline? So we'll look at a few different aspects of this. So how it's easier for some people to truly be themselves online, how it's easier to create different versions of yourself. We'll talk about things like selfies and stuff as well, which we will come back to because there's so much research on these. So we'll talk specifically about selfies in terms of body image. So we're only kind of touching on it today. But essentially, I guess what I want to talk about is the many different ways that we can express who we are for so many different reasons. And some of them positive and some of them maybe less positive.
Okay. The selfie one is kind of interesting. I always use an example of selfies and how someone is always going to be unhappy in a group selfie.
Oh God, well, group selfies are, yeah.
And obviously the person who posts the photograph only is focused on themselves.
Of course they are.
As a group selfie,
yeah. I try to at least usually make sure everybody has their eyes open.
There's AI tools if you take a series of selfies and you can pick the best photographs of different people.
Really? That's
yeah, I've used that.
Oh, that's cool. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't think we need any content warnings today. I can't think of any off the bat. If we get to one and I realize, I will let you know. But
no, we're
I'm
good.
Pretty sure today's kind of...
This is happy.
Not the darkest episode I've ever done, which is nice. Makes a nice change. I suppose a key point that you need to understand this conversation is like, what is the self in the first place? It's one of those things that we kind of intuitively have an understanding of, but if you were to describe it, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Liam, and ask you, how would you describe the self? There are wrong answers.
The self or myself?
The self. What is the self?
I think it's like how we generally describe ourselves. So the different attributes, our values. So like if I think of myself, I think if I use myself as an example, even though you told me not to.
No, you can't.
So
I was going to ask you in a minute anyway. So
like how we view ourselves, how we, the perception of like who I am, my self-image, my self-esteem, my political views, my personal values, and how I share that out with everyone else.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. So like the sum of our attributes and our kind of distinct sense of identity that incorporates all of those things that you talked about.
Which is positive and negative depending on what it is.
Yeah, and everybody has some positive and negative ones. Your self-esteem then is how you evaluate that self. So our self-concept or our sense of ourselves is like multidimensional, covers all those different things that you talked about. So like self-image, self-esteem, etc. And the ways that we know ourselves, there's a few different ways. Introspection, so looking inwards and thinking about who we are is obviously one, but interacting with others is a really key part of this. And our experiences throughout our childhood and adolescence are particularly important, but also, of course, as we're adults and the kind of interactions we have. So we're very influenced by our social and our environmental surroundings, and that is part of what develops who we are and the different aspects of self. Another way that we learn about ourselves or know ourselves is social comparison. This is something that's going to come up time and time again in the podcast. So we have upward and downward comparison. We talked about this in the second trolling episode, where people who are higher in trait envy engaged in more upward social comparison and felt upset about not having what other people had. Whereas people, for example, higher in narcissism are more likely to engage in downward comparison to make themselves feel better about themselves and more specifically feel better than other people. But we all engage in social comparison. It's part of how we learn about ourselves, right? So it's not a bad thing at all, or it can be, but it's not always. But it can allow us to look at people doing a bit better than us, which can inspire us to grow and set new goals and learn what we could possibly do. It's only really a problem when it's chronic. So when you're constantly comparing yourself to someone who's doing far better than you. So let's say, I always give the example that you've just joined the gym and you haven't done the exercise in 10 years, this is me a few years ago. And instead of comparing yourself to the person who's in the gym 6 months, who's doing like quite well, that you could kind of reasonably aspire to, you start comparing yourself to an Olympic athlete, right? And then you're just going to feel crap about yourself.
Like, okay.
Like you're never going to get there. You're going to feel terrible about your progress. If you chronically do that all the time, that actually leads to depression. It's one of the reasons why people might feel depressed. So picking someone a little bit further on than you, useful, because you can look at what you could attain, but too much, not great. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the positive and negatives in terms of comparison. So I'm not going to spoiler. So tell me if I'm going to do this. Are you going to talk about the different types of filtering that we do in terms of posting content?
Not necessarily.
So like in terms of upward and downward comparison. So like if I'm talking to adolescents, or generally the content that they post on their own like socials, I'll talk about whether this content is real or not, and the curtailing, so the selective self-presentation. You're going to talk about that? No?
Not as much, actually.
Okay, grant.
Cool.
Okay.
So go for it.
Yeah, so like I'll talk about like the types of content I post. So like my Instagram is very selectively presented because the only time I ever use it is if I'm like, if I'm away on holiday or if I'm doing something nice on a special occasion or I'm trying to share something.
I know, he's always just trying to make us jealous.
Like I don't put up like a selfie where I'm tired or I'm busy or I'm stressed with work or I have lots on my plate. I post up, look at this lovely meal, or I post up like, look at this sunset, or like these are the things that I post. So that's very selectively presented. So in terms of social comparison, if you look at my Instagram, it would give you a perception that isn't actually real life. It's just like the best bits of life. It's the reels of life. So that's particularly where I'm at.
I think that's a really good point. And it comes back to one of the pieces of research that found that if you are participating online, and we talked about this, I think in the first episode, if you're actively participating online, it's more likely to be positive for your well-being because you're also curating what you put up and you realize that other people are. So you're kind of involved in that process and you're familiar with it. But if you only view other people's profiles, you forget that they're doing that and you think that they have an amazing life that's so perfect because they're not putting up the day-to-day mundane stuff.
Okay.
So it's interesting.
There's lots of research on this, by the way.
Okay, cool. We can do another episode.
Yeah, I think we might.
Yeah, because I suppose what I'm trying to do in this episode is cover the basics, like the core concepts of this, but we will definitely come back to some aspects of the self online. Like I know we're going to cover things like identity and belonging in another episode because there wasn't even time to get into it really in this, and that's a huge area.
Even just body image as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Like negative aspects. We're going to go down a trigger warning line if we're not careful.
Yeah.
Sorry, I deviated.
Let's try and keep it light today. So we have different aspects of our identity, like all those aspects that you talked about, your values, your political beliefs, our personality traits, like all these different things. So if I asked you, they kind of fall into different like classes of identity. But if I asked you, who are you, Liam? Like describe yourself.
Oh geez. It's like you should know.
I'm judging.
Yeah. If I start with like my work life, I'm a lecturer. That's all the boring stuff.
Boring, it's fun.
I'm a husband, I'm an uncle, I'm a brother, son, those kind of characteristics we talk about from a family perspective. I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm a gamer. I love to read as well. I like gardening. I like cooking is probably one of my biggest passions, which is kind of boring.
No, sometimes. That's nice.
I'm such a foodie. Yeah, I'm very much a lefty in terms of politics. Have I ticked your boxes?
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. It's a question that you're like, who am I?
I know, yeah.
And it's like introspection that you want me to do. I'm like, you know the gif where the person sees the confusing math formula going through their head? That's what I was like.
I just get the spinning like circle on my forehead. Like I was trying to do this last night and I was like, I don't even know who I am. So I figured I'd just ask you instead.
Okay, that's fine.
So all those fall kind of into different classes of identity. We have our personal identity, so our traits and our values and our abilities and so on. And similarly to you, I am like a lefty liberal in my politics. I'd be both outgoing and introverted, kind of like an ambivert. I love being around people and then I need to recover afterwards.
I love that. I'm an introvert who's learned to be extroverted.
Yeah, well, you kind of have to be as a lecturer, don't you?
Yeah.
You put it on for a bit. But I am extroverted when I'm being extroverted. I'm not putting it on. Although I was extremely shy when I was younger. And I don't think many people would describe me as that now.
I'm extroverted with you. Otherwise, yeah.
Bring out the best in them.
Yeah.
Extroversion is socially desirable.
Yeah, I suppose.
So that would be those individual personal identity characteristics. Relational identity is things like I'm a wife, friend, sister, daughter, aunt, etc. Our social identity is the broader identity. So you started off with yours, your work life. You're a lecturer. Now podcasters. We're both lecturers and podcasters. So there are like social roles. And then we have our collective identity. So I'm Irish, I'm a woman. They would be part of my collective identity that I would strongly identify with. When you consider all these different aspects that make up the self, it's probably not surprising that we're not always exactly the same person all the time, on or offline. Would you behave exactly the same way in work, teaching in front of a class, than you would out with your friends on a Saturday night?
No.
Exactly.
Also, like teaching happens all the time. The out with friends on a Saturday night, I'm so boring. That
So
does
rare.
not happen that very much. I'm definitely that person who's like, yeah, I'm going to come, and I'm just like still on the sofa.
I kept it vague, sort of like it sounds like we might have been clubbing, but it's like really likely that we were sitting having dinner with somebody. So
Yeah, I think so.
You know, similarly, are you the same on LinkedIn and Instagram? Well, we know that your Instagram is just like holidays and food.
Oh, my Instagram is completely fake, perfect life. My my LinkedIn is very much focuses on professional. I don't actively use it as much as I probably should. Yeah, very different
I find the
lives.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find LinkedIn a bit overwhelming for some reason. But I like Instagram more. My Instagram is a weird mix of personal and work and podcast and social activism issues and things like that. I just put them all in together. Some people separate them out. We will talk about that.
My Instagram is such a happy place.
I know it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. The only problem is you don't post that often. So
No, I don't.
yeah.
That's,
So I'm not getting all that much joy from it. You need to post nice things more often.
Yeah, no, but it's other people. I don't have to participate all the time.
But mine's also open. Mine's a public profile. So
No, that's
I
never
should
gonna happen.
perhaps be more careful about what I post, but I kind of don't. Like if I'm on holidays or something, I'll often post privately to people I know. Because I don't want my house robbed. But otherwise, I generally just post everything to everybody. And if they don't like it, they can unfollow me.
But we're very different in that regard because I have a private Instagram account. I have a public LinkedIn account.
We'll
and
see if
stuff
it's
like
still private by the time this podcast comes out.
that. No, it probably still will be. I don't know. I have my private Instagram account. And then even within that, I have another additional layer of privacy because I have a close friends group.
Friends. Yeah.
And like I prefer to do that. So if I'm like out for dinner with my husband or something like that and I post a photograph of him, I won't necessarily always post that as a public image,
Yeah.
even though these other people are my friends, because I'm still quite private about my life generally.
And here's me asking you everything about yourself.
Yeah. And I'm like just like verbal
Putting
diarrhea.
it
I'm
all
just
out
giving you
there.
all of that information. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Oh God. I didn't, yeah.
We know how many times that you didn't meet your now husband before you actually got together. We know loads about
I got
you.
approval for that, so I don't mind.
Yeah, okay. So some people are more the same on different platforms, and some people are wildly different. And that varies too. And that's also part of our individual differences and who we are. So there's a personality trait that varies between us in terms of how much we present ourselves as similarly in different situations versus the same in different situations. Some people are firmly exactly who they are all the time. Other people are much more flexible. I'd say I'm very flexible. Like I like to know going into a situation what's kind of appropriate for that situation, what's normal for that situation so that I can adapt to it because then I feel more comfortable in it. Other people are like, this is who I am, this is what you get, which I really admire. I can't do that.
Yeah, no, that's not me.
Yeah.
I need to know the environment, the situation I'm in. And
Yeah.
no, I can't.
Yeah,
I
for
can't do it.
comfort.
Yeah.
I always trace it back to like how shy and socially anxious I was when I was young, but I don't know that it's necessarily that. That's just my own history that I draw from.
I wonder is it a relationship with introversion there?
Possibly, yeah. There's a number of theories of the self and the idea that we have many selves. So we've talked about different aspects of the self, but there's also the idea that we have like different selves. So this goes way back to the 50s, right? Rogers was one of the first talking about the idea of the true self. And that's something that we've talked about briefly. We talked about it in online dating. The idea the true self exists psychologically, like we're aware of who we are as a true self, but we might not be able to fully express it in our social lives. And it might vary in how much we're able to express it or not. So there might be small aspects of yourself that you don't always express out loud, or maybe it's a key part of your identity. So if you're in an environment where it isn't okay or socially acceptable to be a member of the LGBTQ plus community, for example, maybe a whole big aspect of yourself isn't expressed. So it can vary quite a bit between people. We'll get into how this manifests online in a sec, but very close to when Rogers was talking about this, I think he was 1951. Carl Jung in the mid-50s talked about the idea of the public self, which is the persona, and the inner self, which is a very similar idea. And then later researchers around the 80s started to identify the idea of like possible or potential selves. And Higgins is the person who kind of described the three self concepts that we have. And this is a framing that you see quite a bit in the research on the self online at the moment. So there's the ideal self, and that is the self that we strive for, the one that we would like to be. The ought self, the one that we feel others think we're obligated to be, or that society feels like we should be. And the actual self, so how we're expressing ourselves at the moment.
I don't
currently.
think I really pay much attention to the ought self.
Yeah, I don't a whole lot. A little bit, though.
Yeah, I don't think I do. I think I don't pay that much attention to the ought self. So like the obligations, I don't feel that in terms of like social media use. I definitely, like the ideal self is definitely my Insta. And the actual self, yeah, it's just try to be as genuine as you can. I don't know.
I would say my social media presence definitely isn't an ideal self. Like it is, and this comes up in the research as well, most people aren't presenting the ideal self. They're presenting a positive version of their actual self. So they're leaving out the boring bits. It's more
That's probably a
selective
better description
lack
what I
of
do.
presentation rather than creating an ideal that doesn't really exist. So you're presenting the best bits of the actual self rather than an ideal self.
Yeah, it's like the best bits, but a lazy version of the best bits.
Whereas I present a more mixed kind of range of things than you do.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, like, when you look at the research on these, like, again, going back quite far, there can be discrepancies between them. Like self-discrepancy theory talks about this. Like the bigger the distance between your actual self and your ideal self or the ought self, that can cause psychological distress or dissonance. Again, let's go back to the gym idea, right? You've just joined the gym and you decide you're comparing yourself to Olympic athletes and that's where you want to be. That's going to cause some dissonance for you because it's really difficult to achieve that. And particularly from the place you're in as a very unfit person, it's going to be really hard to achieve that. And so it's kind of psychologically distressing. Same with the ought self. If you're gay and you're in a situation where that is completely unacceptable or illegal or there's like, violence against people, then that's psychologically distressing as well. But usually there's only small gaps. For a lot of people, there's only small gaps between that. And that's kind of a healthy place to be. You generally aren't. Your actual ideal self isn't the same thing. There is usually some gap because we're always trying to improve and grow and so on. So a little bit of a gap's good. Quite early online research looked at these ideas of the self. There's a really key study from Barr, McKenna and Fitzsimmons that looked at this in 2002, which is a very long time ago now, and found that the true self, so the one that we know exists but we might not be able to express, is more available in online interactions than in face-to-face interactions. So people were better able to kind of feel their true self online and to express it online. And some people in particular, so particularly for shy and socially anxious people, those people were more likely to develop close friendships online and bring those friendships offline. And they found that intimacy develops more quickly, possibly because they're disclosing their true self sooner than they feel comfortable offline. So I think that's really interesting. It's a really positive aspect of the online world. And this was something that we saw in the online dating episode too. It was one of the motivations for using online dating was that ability to be comfortable expressing who you are online rather than face to face.
It's a bit of benign disinhibition at play as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So we feel safer behind that device and disclosing that information, particularly around some of the more difficult conversations, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I also talked in the online dating episode about the idea that when we are creating like an online dating profile, we draw from different selves. And this is something that happens quite a lot. So with an online dating profile, there might be some aspect of the ideal self that you're using to describe yourself. But you like dating profiles where it's just the ideal self, which isn't who you are right now, don't actually do very well. People pick up on that, but you can draw from aspects of it. So you might have just joined the gym, but you describe yourself as a gym goer, or you're about to join the gym and you describe yourself as a gym goer. Like it's something achievable. It's not quite a lie. But
yeah, but if you say you're a gym goer and you're not in a gym, that's a lie.
Well, maybe you've signed up, you haven't got there yet.
That's still a lie.
But by the time you've gone the date, you'll be a gym goer.
Sure.
So it's achievable, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of drawing on aspects of the ideal self. You might be describing yourself as a little bit of how you'd like to be rather than as exactly who you are right now. But it tends to be within a reasonable level that you could achieve it. So, you know, you're drawing on your actual self as well. And also maybe the self that you expect other people are looking for from you on a dating site. You know, there's certain gender things that are expected on dating sites and stuff that people sometimes play up that isn't necessarily what they would do in real life. There's a whole bunch of stuff around gender.
It reminds me of, you know, in Friends when Joey is creating his acting CV and he says he can like speak French and he has to get lessons in French. It's kind of like that where the little white lies are fine, but anything that is way more complicated than it should be is just not a no-go.
Definitely. There's some really interesting research on when the researchers asked people to create avatars for different situations, and they created slightly different avatars for each situation. So, for example, they made their avatar for online dating more attractive than their avatar for gaming, but they were all related to themselves. Like they created avatars that look like themselves, but emphasize different aspects of themselves.
Okay.
So this idea that we might be a little bit different in different spaces is definitely evidenced in the literature, and very clearly is the case offline as well as online.
Yeah.
So how we express that self online comes down to our self-presentation. And self-presentation is where we're trying to manage the impressions that other people form of us. So if you think about the idea, that kind of classic idea that the world is a stage and we're an actor on it, that's the basic idea of self-presentation. So we're trying to present a version of ourselves to other people, and we want people to believe that that's who we are. Now, often it is who we are, but sometimes we might be trying out something new or acting out a slightly ideal version of ourselves. And when other people respond to that positively, that can actually give self-validation for that aspect of ourselves as well. It's one of the ways people grow and develop. They try out something new, and some of the way teenagers develop, they try out new things and new aspects of themselves. And when people respond positively to it, it's validating for that and it becomes kind of integrated. Typically, we're trying to create a positive kind of presentation, have ourselves look well, because other people's perceptions of us are important and they influence how we perceive ourselves and they validate our own sense of self. So we do care what other people think of us, some more so than others, some much too much. I used to care way too much, and as I've gotten older, I definitely care less.
But people like to be liked. That's okay. That's
Absolutely.
not a negative thing. I think when you talk about selective self-presentations, what we put in online about ourselves, like I care what people think about me. I care about my reputation and how that's related to my personality. And that's if you get validation from that, great. If you get validation from being genuine in yourself, also great.
Yeah, very normal. All those things, really, really normal. The way that we present ourselves, there's lots of different motivations for why we might present ourselves in a different way in different spaces. So you have social motivations. So you might be looking for a friendship or a date. So you'd present yourself maybe in a particular way to achieve that goal. Material motivations like getting a job. So you'd emphasize certain aspects of yourself for that. But also identity and self-esteem. A really key thing in your motivation is the gap between the impression that the audience already holds of you and the one that you want them to hold of you. So if it's someone you've never met, you've got a free slate, blank slate to create whatever impression you want. But if people know you already and you're trying to change that impression, if there's a really big gap between what they know about you and what you want them to think, that's really difficult and quite stressful. So imagine you've done loads of work on your CV, you've done a great first phone interview with someone lower down the organization, and you look super, super professional. And then you show up for the main interview and it's someone that you used to go clubbing with and get absolutely hammered with when you were like 20. And that's the last time they met you and that's all they know about you. And you now know that's the first impression that they have of you. That's what they think of you right now.
You'd just die, wouldn't you?
You'd just die. Because that's a big gap to overcome. Now, maybe the person isn't taking that into account, but you can't know that. You just know they hold this particular view of you. Now, maybe they were there too. So maybe they were understanding. Maybe they were the sober person there and whatever. I don't know. But
people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Yeah, but you get the idea. If there's a big gap there, then that's a problem. It's why first impressions are so important, because overcoming that first impression, if it wasn't good, is really difficult. There's also a part of self-presentation, which is the desire to explore parts of yourself that you're not able to express. This is more so in anonymous environments, because in anchored environments where people know who you are, so social media is an anchored environment, you are either encouraged or have to use your real name, like Facebook makes you use your real name. And so the people that you are linked to in those environments tend to be people that you know offline or who know you previously in some capacity. And experimenting with your identity is quite difficult when you're doing it with people who already know you, because there's quite a high likelihood that someone will call you out on it and say, well, that's not who you are. That's not what I remember. What are you doing? So,
whereas as when you're a teenager, like you can go through, you can have your goth phase and no one is going to like judge you for it.
Well, they might, but it's part of being a teenager is getting judged. It's awful.
They can go away.
Couldn't pay me to go back. And so anonymous spaces, I think, are where that's more likely to happen, that kind of experimentation with identity. There's not that there's fewer of them now, they're less kind of common and popular. Like when the internet kind of started up, there were loads of these spaces and people tried out all different kinds of stuff. And it's quite interesting because like in online games and online communities, people would often try out new identities that were maybe like a gaming character. So they'd be like a troll and it'd be quite fantastical and they'd act in character for a while. But the more experienced they got in the environment or online, the more likely they were to revert back to who they actually are. Because when we try to build relationships with people, it's much easier to do that from a place of authenticity rather than a place of being a character. So most people actually want to be themselves and they want to connect with other people. So I think that's quite interesting and quite important. But because most online spaces that we use a lot now, like social media, are very anchored to our offline life, there isn't as much of that experimentation happening.
I suppose it's more in gaming environments, really, isn't it?
Yeah, gaming and places like VR chat. Have you ever been in VR chat?
No.
I supervised a really interesting project from a 3D animation student who was just fantastic. But she did a really interesting project developing a 3D animated character, like skin avatar for VR chat, and then took me through VR chat and the experience of it in a video and stuff. It's the wild west of the internet. It's absolutely bizarre. It's like the old days of the internet, except in VR. So it's all like characters and stuff. Highly sexualized. The reason she was creating a gender neutral character is because all the female characters are hypersexual. And it's just wild. Like it's not safe for work.
Okay, I think I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting though for research. And we've actually had a student, I think, do some research in that space as well. So yeah, it used to happen more in the early internet, a bit less now, although you still see this in some ways through stuff like catfishing. So like one of the motivations for catfishing might be exploration of identity, but we are going to do a whole episode on catfishing, so I am not going to get into that right now. Cool. It's just a teaser for another episode in a few weeks' time. On the other hand, some deception can actually be lower in computer-mediated communication because you have a record of what you're saying. And so someone can go back and check. So like in email versus phone, whatever you write in email, someone can go back and look at. So you have to be a bit more honest. Whereas over the phone, you can kind of say it and it's a matter of whether the other person is believed or not.
I just assume as soon as it's in any form of digital artifact, it's there forever. That's the mentality
totally
that I have.
Yeah, totally is. But why is it easier to do this online? There's a number of characteristics of the internet that make it easier to kind of shift and change how you express your identity in a way that's not as easy offline. The first is that it's asynchronous, which means that there's a gap between you sending something and the other person reading it and responding and replying to you. And that allows you time. It allows you time to think about what you're doing, what you're sending, which gives you more control and time over the editing of what you're sending. So you can create a slightly better version of what you might have said face to face.
Also the emotional state of the person at the time. So if you're annoyed and you have time to reflect or change your sentiment.
Exactly. Yeah. You also don't have to worry about your physical characteristics. So like if your hands are shaking or if you're nervous or if you're stammering, like you're freed up from worrying about that and you can concentrate on how you're presenting yourself through text or image and so on. And you have more cognitive resources because of that. And because you're not worried about what's going on around you, what the other person's doing, their physical response, all of those kinds of things that allow you more cognitive resources to focus on presenting yourself. So it gives you just a lot more control, a lot more space to think about what you're doing. And that allows you to create either different versions of yourself, a slightly better version of yourself, a little bit more maybe coherent or funny. Like some people are naturally just more funny online because they have a bit more time to think about it than offline. Some people are just naturally very funny offline. So I talked about this in the online dating episode and how those same features that allow us more control over how we present ourselves might also develop into hyper-personal communication. So that's where the impression that we form of other people can become overly idealistic. And it can lead to greater intimacy, heightened emotions, more self-disclosure, and very like quickly kind of forming that relationship. But the greater control also allows us to adapt our identity in different situations online. So we can curate our LinkedIn to be more professional and our Snapchat to be more fun with friends and more relaxed, and our Instagram to be super pretty. Like I think each social media platform kind of has a personality. I feel like TikTok's more authentic. Instagram's very curated and perfect. LinkedIn's super professional.
Yeah. This is all selective self-presentation. So
Yes.
I don't use TikTok because I don't know, I'm just out of touch.
You're just so old.
Yeah.
I'm so much
I
younger
wasn't
than
going to
you.
use that word. Thanks. But yeah, like I when I go onto a platform, I have a specific purpose with how I'm going to use it. And you have these kind of like subversive norms of behavior and how you present yourself and how you communicate and how that might be appropriate. Like we're really good friends, so we would use all of these platforms all of the time and we will have very different conversations on different platforms and sometimes we'll have multiple conversations across multiple platforms at the same time, so it's very like
It's confusing. But we're good at multitasking, we tell ourselves. No one's good at multitasking. We'll talk about that in another episode.
I want to talk about multitasking and notifications and the impact on attention separately, so okay.
Not right now. So yeah, definitely selective self-presentation across different platforms. But that doesn't mean that any one of those versions of you is less you, right? They can all be very you. Some of them might not be. Some of them might be more curated and idealized than others. But for a lot of people, they're actually quite authentic. And that's what the research is telling us anyway.
So we actually asked you how you present yourselves. So we did a poll through some of our platforms and we were asking you, do you represent yourself the same way as you do online and offline? So we had over 50% of you say yes. A very small amount of people said no. And about a quarter of people said it depends on the platform. So this similarly relies on the same information. We also asked you if you had ever experienced someone else misrepresenting themselves in an online space.
And we left that kind of open-ended. So that could be in any sort of scenario at all.
Yeah, like dating, whatever. And over 80% of you said yes.
Wow. That's a lot.
But it's like misrepresentation. I think misrepresentation, it depends what we mean by it. Is it like these small white lies or is it like barefaced catfish?
Yeah. We're going to have to ask better questions.
Yeah.
We did ask some open-ended text boxes, but none of you answered. So next time you're going to have to tell us.
Yeah.
We didn't leave very long, in fairness.
Nah.
But I think that's interesting because I can't remember if I talked about this in the online dating episode. It was a little while ago now. But one of the interesting things in online dating is that a lot of people show up for a first date and they feel like the person isn't who they thought they were. And they often kind of put that down to thinking that the person lied to them.
Well, we had that story, the online dating story, where the guy said that the girl he went on a date with, she had not used up-to-date images, and basically what was appeared on the date was not what was advertised. I'll never forget that language.
That was his language. Yeah. That's not Liam's language. He would never say something like that.
But I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. But sometimes it is that, but sometimes it's actually just that you've misinterpreted something somebody said as well.
Okay.
But put that down to them lying when it's actually you read something in a particular way and made an inference from that isn't accurate.
Yeah.
So it can be a mix of that stuff. But I think it's interesting that a lot of people feel like other people are misrepresenting themselves online. We know that from the research as well as from this little poll that we did, which is very scientific, very evidence-based.
We can be critically evaluate ourselves.
We can.
It's only a poll. Like, it's not a long piece of research. No. So we're good.
It's not. So there's some evidence that the way that we present ourselves online is actually related to our idea of ourselves and how stable that self-concept is. So Chris Fullwood and colleagues developed a self-presentation online scale. So they used this to look at the way self-concept was related to the different ways in which adolescents might present themselves online. And they found that adolescents who had a less stable sense of self, so a less clear sense of who they are, were more likely to experiment with online self-presentation and also more likely to present an idealized version of themselves. They preferred presenting themselves online too, possibly because it allowed them that flexibility to present differently. Whereas adolescents who had a more stable self-concept, so who had a clearer sense of who they were, presented themselves more consistently with their offline self. But in general, as kids got older, they tended to be more consistent in their presentation of self because our self-concept tends to clarify over time. Like, it's very much in flux in early adolescence. We don't know who we are at all. And like, there's differences between people and between kids. Some kids have a better idea of who they are in adolescence than others. But in general, it's a time of flux. And then as you get older and into your mid-20s, that tends to solidify more and you get a clearer sense of who you are.
I was going to say, like, I would argue until like early adulthood.
I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely an early adult though.
Sure.
Yeah. But Nicole Strimbu and colleagues adapted that online self-scale for adults and found again that people with a lower self-concept, so a less clear sense of who they were more likely to present differently online and offline, so less authentically online. So I think it's interesting that if you aren't clear about who you are, you're more likely to present less authentically online.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So authenticity is something that's important. Like, people talk about how it's important to them. A lot of influencers kind of work off the idea that authenticity is key to how you connect with other people. Their version of authenticity might be an aspect of who they are. It's an authentic aspect, but maybe you're not seeing the whole thing. What's really interesting about authenticity and deception and like this kind of real self-presentation is that if you know you're going to meet somebody, or if you already know somebody, you're more likely to present authentically. Mm-hmm. So if you're an online dating site and you actually want to meet people in real life, you are more likely to present authentically than if you're just trying it out for the fun. And then you're more likely to be deceptive because no one's going to see you and call you out on the stuff afterwards. So there's been some experiments done on this that were really interesting, where they basically manipulated the conditions. Either you were emailing somebody and they would never email back. You wouldn't have to have even a conversation with them. They might email back, or you might potentially meet them in person. You were never actually going to meet them in person, but they told you that you were going to. And that changed how people presented themselves. They were more authentic for the person they were going to meet in person.
In other words, you're going to be called out for your shit.
Exactly.
If you like. Yeah.
We had a student in our master's in cyber psychology, Lillian Boylan, who did a really interesting study that I supervised. And I found this one really fascinating. I thought the results were really interesting as well. So what she did was compare Instagram and BeReal for authenticity of self-presentation.
You need to explain what BeReal is here.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. It's not very popular. And it was on the downward slope by the time she got around to doing this research. But BeReal came out a few years ago. I can't remember what year it came out. And it was sort of a flash in the pan of popularity for a little while, and then it dropped off quite a lot. There's still like a couple of million people using it, I think, but not very many in comparison to other platforms. It's essentially a platform, social media platform. You connect with your friends, and once a day at a random time during the day, it asks you to take a photograph with both your back and front camera. So you could be doing absolutely anything at all. You ideally take it right away because then you can see other people's photographs, but you can delay it, but you're not allowed to see anybody else's photographs until you've taken your photos and posted them.
Right.
And the idea is that it's more authentic, it's less curated, less self-presentation involved because it's in the moment, it's spontaneous. You would hate it.
No, I downloaded it. Is what I was about to say.
Oh, did you?
I downloaded it, and I used it for 2 days, and I stopped because like I'm not good with my notifications, and like it's more so the time of day, and it gives you like a random notification. I'm like, oh, whatever. I'm just not a normal
Name's very
user.
organized. He likes things at a particular time.
I try to be, but like if I'm getting a random notification, it doesn't suit my schedule. Give over.
So some people really liked it because it was more authentic and because also the images are ephemeral on it as well. So it's a bit different to having an Instagram grid where everything's permanent. It's a little bit more like stories, I suppose.
Okay, yeah.
The app also didn't have features like filters and so on in the way that Instagram does. And so for that reason, it's also considered more authentic because the image is the image. That's kind of it. So she looked for the difference in authenticity and found quite a large effect, and that people were more authentic on BeReal in their self-presentation than on Instagram.
Okay, and that's I suppose that's the purpose of the app, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that ability to apply filters and edit images on Instagram could be part of that as well, because the image that you post on BeReal is just the image. It's quite authentic. It's quite straightforward. You're not kind of playing around with it and making it better.
Yeah, that's true.
She also did some qualitative research on why people use the platforms and found loads of commonalities between them, as you do between pretty much all social media platforms. So things like entertainment, surveillance, which just means looking at other people's profiles and content.
Than that, yeah.
The memory utility, which is basically kind of having a repository of memories. And those were more mundane memories for BeReal and more significant life events for Instagram. So things like the reason you use Instagram, which is nice events, holidays, really nice things that happen. It was more like that for Instagram. But it was, people liked the idea that you could keep track of your everyday existence and have memories from just those small moments with BeReal. People used both for social interaction, but they found that parasocial interaction was unique to Instagram because of the way the app functions. So you obviously connect with your friends on both, but because the content is quite ephemeral, etc., people aren't really acting as influencers in the BeReal space. And so you're not following people for that reason. You don't have that parasocial interaction with them. Self-promotion on both platforms, which you would expect with Instagram. We were kind of surprised about it for BeReal, but basically what it was people would wait to take a better picture on BeReal of something more interesting. So they were considering their audience. So rather than taking, you know, a picture of their desk, they'd wait until there was something a bit more interesting to kind of entertain or be valuable to their audience, provide a more valuable insight into their life. That's really interesting.
So they've actually we can't help ourselves and we've gone against it and we've tried to like modify our best self. Okay, cool.
But what was unique to BeReal was what Lane called the convenience utilities. This was ease of use and carefree posting, the spontaneity of posting, as well as peer influence. So people encouraging them to use it because it was kind of new and trending thing. Whereas Instagram had information seeking, which wasn't really a feature of BeReal at all because BeReal is so ephemeral. So stuff isn't there to look up and find out more information about things. I think these results could be similar to like Finsta versus Instagram as well in terms of authentic presentation. So Finsta tends to be a like hidden profile that you have for only your very close friends. It tends to be more fun, spontaneous. You're not always presenting yourself in the most flattering way, whereas Instagram is more curated and that kind of memory feature of collecting information about significant events and so on. So I think it's interesting looking at the like affordances or the features that are available on different platforms affect the way that you might present yourself on them as well and the way you use it. Now, BeReal didn't last long really and didn't become hugely popular because I think some of those information seeking, connecting with people aspects of it are really important to social media and it didn't offer enough of that.
But they encourage engagement.
Yeah.
So if they're not, if the features are limiting and I can't interact with you as much and I want to be in a social space with other people, that's going to limit what they can do. Yeah.
And I think stuff like stories and close friends stories and stuff kind of give a little bit of the feeling of what BeReal was about. That ephemeral thing. Like we know that people care less about their self-presentation in stories than they do in what goes on the grid.
But see, in terms of my use, like I mainly post stories.
I know.
Like that's where my life happens. It doesn't really happen in my grid.
Yeah.
My grid is, God, I can't even remember the last time I posted in my grid.
I think it's your wedding.
Maybe. But like outside of that, I haven't in ages.
I don't actually post very much. I used to post more in my grid. I just haven't been doing all that much cool stuff. See, that's the thing. That's the selective filtering. Only the cool stuff gets into the grid.
Yeah.
Everything else doesn't
significant
necessarily.
life events and that's it.
Actually, our podcast is in my grid. There's a significant life event.
Yeah, there we go.
There's a really nice paper that came out by Bailey and colleagues on authentic self-presentation on social media. And what they were looking at was whether this was related to well-being for greater subjective well-being. They had 2 studies, really nice paper. The first study was correlational, and they were looking at whether authenticity and self-expression was related to life satisfaction, and they found that people who were more authentic reported greater life satisfaction. And that effect was consistent across different personality profiles. So that kind of counters the idea that people of socially desirable personalities, so like extroversion tends to be valued a bit more by society, so does agreeableness and so on, that they would benefit from authentic self-presentation more than others. But that does not appear to be the case. It seems like everyone benefits from authentic self-presentation in terms of greater life satisfaction. So the second study, the first was correlational, obviously, so you can't say anything about cause and effect. The second study was a pre-registered longitudinal experiment, which did show causal relationships between authentic posting and positive affect and mood, which is just really, really interesting. So it suggested that basically how you're using social media is related to well-being, but the way in which you use it is more important than other factors.
Well, we know the research on Instagram, particularly in terms of well-being, there's been lots of studies around how you use the platform. So like if I passively consume people's content and make downward comparisons, or upward comparisons by comparing myself negatively to someone else, that has a negative impact on your well-being. But if I comment, I get involved with the post avo that you're posting up, like that doesn't have a negative impact. It actually has a positive impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a bit about selfies, just briefly. And I mainly want to talk about it in the context of moral panic, which is my favorite topic that I always come back to. Believe it or not, this is not a new moral panic, right? There's a lot of headlines about it, but I want to give you 2 headlines from back in the very old days, and not like the old days when I was a kid. I mean, the old days when like my great grandmother was a kid.
Is this like, I'm not allowed to look at the screen?
No, okay. You can look. So this one is the first one. No genuine photographs. Actuality sacrificed to please the vanity of men as well as women. 1892. What they were talking about in the article was that there were now like kind of street photographers or places where you could go get your photograph taken, and people were worried about how they looked in them. And so they were less worried about how they actually were and more like creating a version of themselves that was pleasing to the camera and pleasing to other people, which is exactly what people complain about. I have some new headlines as well about selfies. Then this one isn't about photographs, but it's about mirrors. But the idea is kind of the same. So it's women constantly walk into danger. Accidents which are due to women's passion for looking in mirrors in stores are slight compared to the ones which result from the use of the fascinating little hand mirror.
Right. Okay.
So we see really similar headlines about selfies. Interestingly, and similarly to those, they're rarely about young men. They tend to focus on young women. And society generally is quite disparaging about things that young women like doing, whether that's fashion or makeup or dancing or selfies or teeny bop or girly pop or anything like that. Society tends to be quite dismissive of it. But some of the headlines: pride and vanity, selfie addiction can lead to unnecessary stress, say psychiatrists. This really reminds me, sorry for interrupting, this really reminds me of the headline about like selfie-itis and that made up term. Yes.
Yeah.
Which was the next one I was going to read. Oh,
sorry.
That was why I paused, because I was like, didn't we cover this one in episode 1? Selfitis, obsessive taking of selfies, is a serious psychological complex.
Yeah.
From tragic selfie deaths to Instagramming on the go, it's official. Vanity has gone viral.
But people have died They have died because they've been taking selfies in dangerous places.
They have, but people had also died in the past for other reasons. And like that second headline from the 1800s I talked about, women constantly walk into danger because of hand mirrors.
Yeah,
it's not happening so much, but of course when one happens it's interesting and the papers are going to report on it.
Of course, because it's
unusual.
It's awful. Something terrible has happened to someone, and then the way it's happened is, again, can be made sensationalist.
Exactly. They're very similar to what happened in the past in terms of headlines about people. One thing I will talk about is that in terms of self-presentation, like obviously one of the ways that you can self-present on Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok is to use filters. And one piece of research shows that we know that excessive self-presentation in terms of using filters, like using too many filters or being over-filtered, isn't actually perceived well, doesn't come across well. You get fewer likes. Whereas on the other hand, if you have selfies with more social information, so more information about where you are or who you're with or what you're doing, that allows people more information to make judgments or kind of assess who you are and your characteristics. That actually results in more liking. So giving a bit more information rather than just your face with loads of filters on it is a better way to get liking or to get likes than just straight up pure selfies. I really don't want to go into the research on selfies too much because we're going to come back to it in much bigger detail. But I just think it's interesting that the news headlines have been reporting on these ideas, like particularly of women's vanity for so long. There is some evidence that selfies might be having a negative effect, particularly in areas like cosmetic surgery, and also in particular on like Eurocentric beauty standards. Like most of the features are designed to make everyone conform to those. And also whiteness. There's been a lot of issues around some of the beauty filtering, lightening people's skin, people of color skin and stuff, like really problematic and harmful stuff.
You can't see my face, but I'm like, my face is like my eyebrows, like we're hitting the top of my forehead. But like the use of filters, I use filters and like, that's more so just like adding giving yourself a little bit of a tan or whatever. Like, or like a sunset or a photograph like that, or like adding a light filter to like a holiday photograph or something like that. But like,
is that like filters or is that just color correction? I don't consider that. I don't consider color correction filtering.
Use filters to do it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And then back in the day of like the old school Instagram, like X Pro 2 was a color filter. I don't know if X Pro 2 is still there, but it was like this like orangey hue effect that people would put on everything.
Like sepia-ish or something.
Yeah, but it was just everywhere. Yeah. Everyone was using it.
Once those filters started being introduced, it's quite funny how much everybody adapted them for a while and then stopped. And I think you'll see like this whole period in time where everybody's photographs are either like super saturated or sepia or whatever, got really popular around the time I got married, actually. So a lot of the like quick photos that I took have a filter on them.
Oh, I'm so
very
guilty.
Reminiscent of the time.
I'm very guilty.
So the last thing I want to talk about is self-presentation for professional reasons. And it's not that selfies aren't on LinkedIn, because it is riddled with them as well, but it is a different kind of platform. So it's obviously more professional. And while all social media platforms have a lot of things in common and a lot of similar purposes in how we're communicating on them, there is a different slant for sure on LinkedIn. It definitely is differentiated from the others. So we had a student on our masters, again, do some research on this. We get such a great range of projects on the masters. It's brilliant. But would you tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Angelica Mari did research on this. So Angelica is a graduate of our program. She's absolutely amazing. So hi, Angelica, if you're listening to this. So there's your little shout out. So LinkedIn have something called a social selling index, or an SSI score. So I'm going to put Nicola on the spot and see what her SSI score is. Okay, and I love this.
This could go one of two ways.
So an SSI it's actually the only publicly available metric on any social media platform. And it talks about social selling. So this is across 4 different indicators. So the first is how you establish your professional brand. So this is how complete your profile is and the content that you share. Finding the right people. So this is your ability to connect with other people for professional purposes. Engaging with insights, so that's sharing, building relationships on that platform with relevant updates to those people. And then the strength of your network is the final one. So who you're connected with. So your SSI score is a score from 0 to 100, and a higher score indicates better SSIs. So, Nicola, your score is 56 out of 100. Yeah. Okay. Not too bad.
Not too bad. Considering I don't try.
Yeah, so this is what's really important, is the SSI has to be like continuously maintained by the user for it to be any higher. So I'm actually, if you don't use it very much, then I would expect a lower score.
Yeah.
Your professional brand is 16.25 out of 25. That's pretty good. You're finding the right people. You don't use the search function enough. It's 7.6.
I never use
It's actually 7.688. It's that, like, the metric is very precise. Engaging with insights and other people, that's 11. And your building relationships is high. Your building relationships is 21.8.
So I'm good with people.
It is pretty good. So by comparison, my SSI score is 50. My personal brand is 16. My finding the right people is lower because I'm barely using that search function. My engaging with insights, my relationships, they vary. But it really interestingly, it compares you in the industry. So across your industry. So it's to help you from a career perspective. So this is why it's publicly available. It looks at how you compare to those. So mine is in higher education, obviously. The average for people in higher education is 27 because mine is 50. I'm in the top 4%. What's yours?
I'm in the top 2% because mine's 56.
Oh, great.
So I beat you. Turns out I'm competitive.
Yeah, definitely. But then it looks at the people within your network. So it compares you within your own existing network and what their average is, and then ranks you within that. So it kind of does this upward and downward comparison for you within these metrics.
Okay, interesting.
So that's the SSI score. Now, let me get back to the research because this is important. Because you need to kind of understand how an SSI works, firstly. So Angelica's research, so I love the title of this. It's Look Who's Bragging Now, Understanding Self-Presentation and Compassionate Self-Identity on LinkedIn Influence Building. So it looks at people who were self-nominated as influencers in their industry area, and then just everyone else. And so it was a sample of just under 200 participants. So it's a small enough study. It was between Brazil and Ireland. So we had a bit of a diverse sample. But it looked at something, so it used the scale you mentioned earlier, the presentation of online self, but we also used a scale called Quiet Ego. And have you heard of Quiet Ego before?
No.
So do you understand the concept of the ego? So obviously Freud, we have id, ego, superego. Superego is where all of our rules and structure are. Id is the kind of impulse control, and the ego balances between the two, and it tries to kind of regulate everything. So Quiet Ego is a self-identity that's nurtured through deliberate reflection and the endorsement of 4 specific values. And it kind of goes between balance and growth as an individual, detached awareness, inclusive identification, perspective taking, and a growth kind of mindedness. Okay. So a quieter ego is a compassionate one, and it's regulated. A self-identity that strengthens our thoughts, our feelings, our behavior, and it's kind of this eudaimonia. It's kind of this eudaimonia of well-being.
So what's eudaimonic well-being?
So eudaimonic well-being is where we pursue happiness. We try to find positive, meaningful experiences. Within those, the quiet ego. So to measure what quiet ego is, it's broken down into 4 further areas, and this is important. So it looks at detached awareness, so the extent to which we feel we're connected to other people, but we focus on the present moment rather than society's expectations. So this is like a mindful perception of ourselves, and it's not very defensive or oppositional with other people. We also have inclusive identity. So this is how much an individual includes other people in their self-concept. So the kind of shared feelings, greater sense of connection with other people. So it emphasizes our relationships and things like empathy. It also looks at perspective taking, so our ability to understand someone else's perspective, so putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. And then it looks at growth, so setting aside and being able to kind of reflect on ourselves, the needs, the meaningful relationships that we have. And it involves actions and contributions to promote both self-growth and the growth of other people. So it kind of relates nicely to the SSI and self-presentation. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But in the study, I'm going to go through some highlights of some of the results. So there was no relationship between high self-presentation and a high SSI score.
Okay, so SSI is more about kind of actively managing relationships and things rather than how you self-present.
How you self-present, yeah. There were significant relationships found between the 4 subscales of the SSI, so the ones I told you about, and the 4 individual elements of the quiet ego scale.
Oh, between all of them.
Yeah. So we identified that influencers have significantly higher online self-presentation. So that's not very surprising. And they have higher SSI scores than everyone else.
Which also not that surprising.
Not that surprising. But we also found that influencers had significantly lower quiet ego.
That is interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Than non-influencers. So the kind of the regulation aspect wasn't there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wonder, is that people who are likely to become influencers are people who are more likely to just keep putting stuff out there and they're like really active, whereas people who are less likely to become influencers are less likely because they're quieter about what they put out there. They're much more cautious or thoughtful about what they put online.
I don't think we can fully answer that with this study. But interestingly, as self-presentation scores go up, so does your SSI. Amongst the participants. So that's also interesting. And for online self-presentation, influencers have higher scores than non-influencers, but for quiet ego, non-influencers had better senses of kind of that eudaimonic life. And what I think is really interesting is that the research found that detached awareness negatively impacts your SSI score. So the more isolated you are, the less likely your SSI is to be high, because you don't really care about building relationships.
Yeah.
And they're less engaged with their network.
Okay.
By comparison, inclusive identity was positively related to things like your professional brand, like how you create your network, enhancing your reputation and your engagement on that platform.
That makes sense.
By comparison, perspective taking positively influenced you helping to find the right people, so your ability to engage and connect with other people. So if I had a high perspective taking score, I'm better at targeting my network and tailoring interactions and my responses to other people. And then lastly, growth positively impacts our finding the right people aspect of the SSI. So engaging with insights, growth orientated, fostering meaningful relationships, actively participating in discussions, and increasing credibility and overall influence on that platform.
Interesting.
It is really cool. And it's nice to see the aspect of self-presentation not just being in like social platforms like Instagram or BeReal or TikTok or any of these. It is just as relevant in our professional networking too.
Absolutely is. Yeah, 100%. So I'll come back to what I kind of started with, which was the key point that there are different aspects of ourselves. Our self is complex, and we have different ways of presenting ourselves in different spaces, both online and offline, for very good reasons, sometimes for less good reasons, like catfishing, for example, but for generally very good reasons, which is to, you know, fulfill certain goals or meet certain needs that we have, whether that's getting a date or a job or other connecting with people, connecting with friends, family, etc. And we have these social spheres that each see us in a slightly different way. And so we are a slightly different person within those spheres. And that's not to say that any of that is not authentic. Like, we can be a little different in different spaces, but still be authentically ourselves. And I think it is interesting to note that being authentically yourself is related to greater well-being. It's one of the few experimental studies that actually looks at well-being in an online context. And it's quite clear that there is a relationship there. So we would recommend presenting yourself authentically online.
As much as possible, yeah.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean you have to share everything. You can be self-selective in what you choose to share, but that it should be authentic.
And it's obviously like way less stressful.
Yeah, it really is. You don't have to keep track of what you're lying about.
Oh, God. So thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. You can find us every second Tuesday wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can also find us on social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube.
At In Bits Podcast.
Yes. Thank you to Owen Hurley, who is our producer, editor, and wrote our really lovely piece of music for our theme tune. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, guys. See you in 2 weeks.